live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to the Mint Special Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025, Achievable or Pie in the Sky. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimbabwe's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Please also tune in to Economic Panorama on Capi Talk every Thursday at 7 p.m. Now, should you have any comments or views on our show this afternoon, please feel free to contact us via our Facebook page, Zimbabwe's TV network, or via our Twitter handle at ZTN News. Good afternoon. I'm your host, Andy Hodges. The National Development Strategy, or NDS1, was officially launched by the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, on Monday, the 16th of November 2020. The NDS1 seeks to move the country from a lower middle-income society towards an upper middle-income society by 2030. The NDS1 comes at a time when the economy appears to be showing the beginnings of green shoots of economic recovery, as evidenced by slowing down inflation, resulting in some measure of price stability and exchange rate stability. The current account surplus, estimated at $1.2 billion by December 2020, has provided a strong basis for sustaining foreign exchange stability. Industry capacity utilization has also shown some gains. An example of that is over 40% of goods currently on shops are from local production, compared to around 5% just in the first quarter of 2020. Challenges, however, still remain with respect to the high levels of poverty, food insecurity, informality and public indebtedness, the limited fiscal space, inadequate social protection coverage, weak institutions, corruption, of course, huge infrastructure deficit, particularly in terms of water and sanitation, weak public health delivery system and education sectors owing to years of gross underinvestment, especially, as I said, in infrastructure. This program seeks to review the National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025, Achievable or Pie in the Sky. And to help us do this, we have gathered an esteemed panel comprising Prosper Chitambara, he's an economist from the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz; Sekai Kuvarika, he's Chief Executive Officer of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, CZI; and Gift Mugano, Professor Gift Mugano, an economist. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, some of our panelists, in fact, two of them were on our show last week where we reviewed what we'd expect in the NDS1. We thought, let's bring them back today to see if their predictions were true and if the NDS1 lived up to their expectations. Prosper, and in fact, I'd like to ask you all briefly, if I can. The NDS1 has finally been launched. Briefly, what are your general impressions?
I think it's a major improvement from TSP, obviously, in terms of even the inclusive and participatory nature in which it was crafted, unlike the TSP. It's also an improvement in terms of having a clear results-based framework, also an improvement in terms of addressing some of the key binding constraints affecting growth and development in the country. And we have also seen the minister trying to balance between the social, the economic indicators and imperatives, and also the social and development imperatives on the other end. And again, it's also well aligned and in sync with the global Agenda 2030 and also with the African Union Agenda 2060.
Yeah. Let me just get brief comments. Just your general impression. Let me start with you, Sekai.
I think the document is a very good document in my view, in the sense that where we are coming from would really require the sort of expression that is contained in that document in terms of bold and transformative approaches, and also really, like Prosper says, a focus on the key binding constraints. I think for me those are the two key elements that I would point to.
Thank you very much. This was the best policy ever since independence, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. And I want to build on what Prosper said in Sekai. Just to add, after identifying binding constraints, it gave very clear policy strategies, which I think are workable and applicable.
Now, Sekai, you know, one area, of course, that I think citizens want to know is basically, you know, how does the NDS1 translate into a better life for them over the next 5-year time horizon? Will it achieve, as the Minister of Finance and Development, Economic Development, Professor Ngube stated, minimum of around $3,000 earnings, which of course is the upper middle income threshold? What is your opinion on that? What is in it for citizens, do you think?
I think any policy document is as good as how much it is implemented. And I would say that the intention stated therein to to raise our economy to an upper middle income economy is achievable. It is achievable that we can stimulate the economy, we can drive growth in all the sectors that are stated in that NDS to a level where we are able to create jobs, to grow our GDP and everything that is intended. The key question is, are we going to implement it? For me, that's the question. And that question, for me, also has to take into cognizance the fact that the document doesn't implement itself, number one. Number two, it is not the sole responsibility of government to implement such a program. So the sooner all stakeholders rally behind the implementation of that document, the more realizable the targets that are in that document will become. So I think that as citizens, we all have a responsibility to realize the goals in that document. Industry will play its part. Everyone has to play their part in realizing all sectors of the economy now has to rally behind that document.
I mean, as the Minister of Finance said, if the building blocks are put in place and they all come true, then obviously citizens benefit from increased growth in industry, increased products, increased water and sanitation services, etc. Gift, let me come to you. One core assumption in the NDS1 is the mainstreaming of youth and gender issues in the strategy. I think it's clearly defined in the document or in the preamble. Furthermore, the issue of provision of social services and social protection are paramount, highlighted to us by the COVID-19 pandemic. In your opinion, does the NDS1 adequately cover these issues?
Yes, it does. It does from a number of angles. If you look at the areas where it emphasizes issues of health, education, access to social services like water, even accommodation, it's a very, it's well explained in an elaborative manner in that document. Job creation. Right, the target for 760,000 jobs is one such indicator. And of course, we have a rural economy, 8 provinces which are rural, and the agricultural sector, there's a lot of emphasis around propelling agriculture. For me, that's a game changer. And of course, as I round up my remark, the social services are a beneficiary of the economic performance. So if we have good economic performance in the economic pillars, then they become an automatic beneficiary.
Everything is interlinked, there's no doubt about that. Possible, you can comment on that as well, but also, you mentioned earlier in the first question I asked you, and in fact the government stated that the NDS1 was crafted after intensive and widespread consultations with all stakeholders. But do you think that the government consulted enough before coming up with the NDS1? And do you believe that some of the inputs given, particularly by citizens, industry representatives, labour representatives, were actually taken on board?
Yeah. So the issue of consultation, obviously, you cannot consult, you can never consult everyone, owing to limitations, financial limitations, even technically. And also consultations were affected, obviously, by the COVID-19 and the attendant restrictions that were then imposed. So I think that slowed down physical or one-on-one consultations. But from the minister, I think they tried to consult with the key constituencies, the key membership-based organizations, the unions, civil society organizations, the elderly, people with disabilities. And yes, I think most of the key concerns that we had raised in terms of some of our inputs, some of our position papers, I think they were taken on board. For example, mainstreaming employment, mainstreaming poverty within the NDS, and we have seen clear poverty reduction targets for every year up to 2025. In fact, we are projecting that if we successfully implement NDS1 by 2021, only about 10% of Zimbabweans will be living in extreme poverty. Obviously, also the job creation targets are quite ambitious, 760,000
No, we'll
jobs.
get to those, What about the youth and gender issues, though? I mean, the NDS states clearly that youth and gender should be also in the mainstream.
Yeah, definitely. Those are what are called the cross-cutting issues. So I think they are reflective throughout the NDS1. So I think now the challenge is probably aligning that to the national budget, which is the key instrument for financing the NDS1.
Because, I mean, it's interesting because it isn't just so much the strategy, it's also changing the mindset of learners to not look for a job, but rather look to make a business. It's also entrepreneurship.
Reorienting re-engineering our education system. So unless we equip our learners with the right kind of skills that are necessary to be creators of wealth, entrepreneurial skills. Now we're talking of the digital economy.
And
digital
that starts
skills
at
are
the colleges
very, very
and
critical.
universities.
And a lot of entrepreneurship, talent, flair amongst our youths that we need really to tap into by supporting and facilitating them.
Sakai, last week on Economic Panorama, in fact, this show, which is why we brought you back to see whether what you said last week and what you hoped to be in the NDS1 was, you mentioned that your organization, the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, had profit suggestions to put in the NDS1. And also, I think you really talked about industrialization. But the question is, were some of your suggestions, did you see some of them in the NDS1 document?
I think the key pillars of our suggestions are in that document. Key among our submissions was the bold and transformative approach. We believe we do need a bold and transformative approach, especially in driving the competitiveness of our industries. So that we find in the document. We also made a submission that was specific to increasing the economic complexity of our economy by advocating for policies that would promote the production of more complex goods, and we see that in the NDS. We also really had stated that the foundation for all this is going to be a stable macroeconomic environment, and key being a stable currency, also a stable exchange rate environment. So for us, where we stand, we see that our input has been incorporated, and we are very, very pleased with that and ready to actually move with the next level of proffering more specific strategies. We also realize that the document does contain quite considerable policy opportunities for industry. So the policy commitment that is expressed in that document is an indication that if we begin to actually work on some of those areas, that's a statement of intent from government that they are committed to working on those. So we are ready to seize those policy opportunities. One among them is the recycling industry, the green industries that are coming up, and to have that specifically stated, and the plastic manufacturing and the plastic recycling. That is also clearly stated. The value chains that we had also put forward as priority value chains are in the NDS.
Wow.
So yes,
it looks like a lot of what you proffered is in the document.
Definitely.
Well, it's time for us to now take a breather. If you have any comments or views on our program this afternoon, please feel free to share them with us via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. You're watching the Mint Special, Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, the National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025, Achievable or a pie in the sky. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Now, after the breather, we look at some of the economic assumptions contained in the NDS1, and we further interrogate whether such issues as water and sanitary provision, infrastructure spending, and health and education are covered in the strategy. The Mint Special will be right back. Please don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching the Mint Special, Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, National Development Strategy 1 or NDS1 2021 to 2025. Achievable or a pie in the sky? This broadcast was brought to you by Zim Paper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Please also tune in to Economic Panorama on Capitalk every Thursday at 7 p.m. Prosper, this is the segment where we look at economic indicators or assumptions in the document. Now, the NDS1 will endeavour to steer the economy onto a growth path to realise an average of 5% gross domestic product growth per annum over the strategy period. Other specific macroeconomic objectives for the 5-year period of the NDS1 are, and I won't go through all of them, but the main one, of course, maintaining fiscal deficits averaging not more than 3% of GDP, create 760,000 formal jobs over the 5-year NDS1 period, of course, infrastructure improvement, development, investment in energy, water, sanitation, roads and housing, beneficiation and value addition, accelerate that, and of course single-digit inflation between 3 and 7% by 2025, international reserves, 6 months import cover, competitive exchange rate, etc. In your opinion, how feasible or realistic are these objectives and the overall macroeconomic framework envisioned in the strategy?
I think those targets and objectives are fairly reasonable. I think they're fairly feasible. When you look at average growth of 5%, I think that's not too high. That's not too low either. So I think we can. Of course, it's based on certain assumptions that may not hold. For this year, we are banking, like the minister said, we're banking on a good rainfall season. Obviously, that will be a boon for the economy. But I think we've already made progress, significant progress, I think, within the TSP. For example, our current account position, it's in a good and healthy surplus. And obviously, that provides a strong basis and framework for sustaining whatever stability we have seen on the foreign exchange markets and ultimately macroeconomic stability. Of course, where I think we are a bit ambitious is in terms of our jobs target. Of course, saying 6,000, someone may say maybe it's not too high, but these are decent, full and productive.
The Minister of Finance did say that the government had created 200,000 jobs, I think, in the last 3 years.
Yeah, that's what
so I assume that maybe they're there. Gift, let me ask you the same question. You heard the question, you heard the targets, you heard the assumptions. Feasible or not?
They're very feasible if we stop one animal called corruption. Because the devil which will stop us from achieving those targets is corruption. We can achieve higher targets than that. This is, look, I would just give one simple example. We are spending over $1 billion US importing agricultural produce, and chief amongst them is cereals, $500 million, soybean, 250 million, right? But we are spending a lot of money, putting money into agriculture, and there's no accountability and transparency, and there's corruption, right? So if you stop that, imagine what will happen if we domesticate at least $1 billion on agricultural produce and make that money available for the auction system. We have permanent stability in as far as the exchange rate is concerned, right? And we'll continue to maintain the downward spiral of inflation. But if we don't deal with corruption, and I think you mentioned very clearly at the beginning, we have weak institutions, then we have a problem. So, but basically, we can achieve these targets, I must say that. But even on jobs, because of the focus on agriculture, it's labor intensive, so that will be the game changer in terms of job creation.
That's the driver for jobs.
Yeah, that's the driver. Yeah.
So Kai, you mentioned this earlier, but I'd like you to expand on it. The NDS1 states that its success will be dependent upon, and I quote, adoption and swift implementation of bold strategies, policies and programs. So let's expand on that a bit more. Are they contained in the strategy, and how do we achieve these bold and transformative policies?
Or implementation modality. First, you introduce a very ambitious strategy as we have introduced. How are we going to make sure that all the policies, all the sector, subsector policies in the economy at the moment are all aligned to the NDS? So for me, the first order of business would be to look at the NDS, look at the agriculture policy, look at the industrial policy, look at tourism, look at various policies, and also look at the different sort of business regulatory policies that we have, and see and test them against the ambitions of the NDS. And should they pass that test, and that I think is an urgent activity, should they pass that test, you know that we can roll out this policy and achieve it. But you'll find that we've got various sector policies that are probably in the second year of implementation, in the first year of implementation, in the third year of implementation, in a 5-year cycle. I would advocate that at this point, we need to take everything and revise it to make sure that we achieve the NDS.
Gift, you can comment on that, but I also want to ask you this. Domestic resource mobilization appears critical to the overall success of the strategy, especially on the back of lack of significant international financial support. The government, however, also claims that development assistance will increase from 500 million in 2020 to over 1 billion by 2025. So what avenues does the government have to raise funds via domestic resource mobilization? And is the figure given for developmental assistance achievable and sustainable?
Thank you for the question. But just to add what Sekai was saying on implementation, I think what's very critical is to have a dashboard which is reviewed and discussed every quarter of the year to make sure that every line ministry, because if you look at these policies, as she said, they are linked to line ministries. But if we go to bed and we come back maybe after 3 years to review, then we are missing it.
Well, I will say, when I had the Minister of Finance on here the other earlier this week, he did mention that at the back of the document was a clear implementation matrix. He also said that ministers will be coming back to cabinet to announce progress made, and in his own words, he said ministers will be held accountable if they don't hit those targets. So I hope that satisfies some of our concerns.
It will, but it must come from the president, because he is not the prime minister. But it's a very good point, and that will satisfy my expectations. But now coming back to the domestic resource mobilization first, I think it's very key, because this is private sector-led economic development. And I think what is very important is the issue of stability. The best stimulus package which government can give to the business is to guarantee economic stability. Right. Then the issue of the development aid, we can only get it if we have the right perception. What happened from 1 August 2018 to date must not happen in 2021. The issue of abduction, whether it's fake or it's real, government is government. It's got a machinery to stop it. So we should not see those issues happening, because it gives us a tag, and we then go into explanation. And in life, when you're explaining, you are losing, right? So we want to see sanity. If people want to demonstrate, let them be organized demonstration. We don't want to see this have-hand, because that is what is killing us, even beyond the development aid. Investments. To attract investments, we need the right perception.
I appreciate that. You're talking about peace and security, basically.
Correct,
okay, fine. Yeah. Prosper, let me come to you, because let me call this the elephant in the room, of course, and that's Zimbabwe's debt. I mean, it's estimated at around 70 to 80% of GDP, and its management, critics allege, is a major area of concern. The government recently also signed a global compensation deed with former farmers valued at $3.5 billion US, which obviously may exacerbate the debt even further if they raise debt instruments to finance it. Does the NDS1 comprehensively address the issue of Zimbabwe's external debt, which remains a major hindrance in terms of full international re-engagement? And how adequate and feasible are the strategies for expenditure management and public debt management?
I think we have very, very strong institutions in terms of our public finance management and even public debt management. And if we were to follow those rules and principles, I think to the letter, then I think there would be prudent financial management. So obviously the issue of the debt, it's like you say, it's an elephant in the room, and we are expecting that both external indebtedness and domestic indebtedness will probably increase on account of the fact that government will probably be forced to
There's nothing wrong with debt per se.
Exactly.
It's about management and paying it back.
Exactly.
I think
and what you are using that money for. If you are borrowing money to invest in the productive capacity of the economy, I think that's very good, because you are enhancing the capacity of the economy to generate wealth in the future. And also, I think the best debt management strategy in the world or anywhere is to sustainably grow the economy beyond your interest payments or the cost of the debt.
Then you can meet the debt.
Exactly.
So Kai, maintaining price stability is critical. And it depends largely on the ability to control money supply growth, and I think, or what we call in Zimbabwe, the printing of money. Given the huge demands and pressures on the expenditure side and the limited fiscal space, will the government possibly be forced to seek recourse to monetary financing and or domestic borrowing? And how can the government sustainably manage these pressures and demands, do you think?
I think like Gift alluded to, everything, those expenditure pressures are really dependent on the economic performance. So if government prioritizes the productive sector as the first order of business and do the bold policy changes that need to be done to quickly move the productive sector into a recovery and growth phase, then those pressures may actually significantly be reduced. So the hope is that we are able to immediately address the ease of doing business, that we are immediately going to be able to address the business regulatory environment at a sector and value chain levels. And I think it's important that we take an aim based on this. The only bold statement that I would make in relation to this NDS is that we have to be intentional about becoming the most competitive place of production in the region. And we then need to rally all our regulatory authorities, all the sector ministries to that objective. Then we can deliver on that, and then we will alleviate that anticipated pressure on the government.
It's interesting. In the NDS, one of the aims was to eliminate quasi-fiscal operations, which the minister said he'd already done, but I think that's a discussion for another day. Gift, let me come to you. The NDS1 has 14 priorities. They range from economic growth, stability, food, nutrition, security, housing delivery, digital economy, human and well-being, etc. Some have argued that focusing on 14 priority sectors at the same time may not work, as the country does not lacks the capacity and fiscal space to be dealing with so many issues at the same time. What are your thoughts on that?
I disagree with that view. If you look at those 14 pillars, they are aligned to a ministry. So if it is devolution, it's the Minister of Local Government. If it is economic stability and growth, this is the Minister of Finance, Reserve Bank, and other economic ministries. So each pillar, health, is Minister of Health. So what are they doing, those ministers? So they have been given their work cut. They must work. So the 14 pillars, as far as I'm concerned, are ministry-related pillars. And to buttress my point, before the NDS was launched, we saw ministries launching their billion-dollar economy. Minister of Mines, 12 billion, Agriculture, 8.2 billion, Industry and Commerce, above 8 billion. They already cut their work, and it's in the pillars. So as far as I'm concerned, they are not an issue.
I mean, one thing as well, the finance minister did say there was a special, he called it a ministry being set up in the office of the president and cabinet that will be monitoring this on a daily basis to make sure that the ministries are following the NDS plan. I mean, I think that was our major point, was to say implementation. I think you've all said that, because we're very good at plans in Zimbabwe. Implementation is the key. We'll have to take a short breather now. You are watching the Mint Special Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025. Achievable or a pie in the sky? This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. In our final segment, we ask, does the NDS1 have a clear strategy on industrialization? How effective will be its implementation compared to previous economic blueprints? I think we've spoken about that a little bit in our previous segments. And will the NDS1 usher in a more accountable, transparent and inclusive way of doing business? The Mint Special will be right back. Please don't go away.
Life will never be the same again.
Absolutely. No. How to tell someone in Mbari or in Soweto that they should exercise social distancing?
Every single one of us, barring a few, are praying more.
What is the health economic cost of what we are trying to achieve?
I don't know whether his chairman knows he runs at about 9 in the morning.
Yeah, I've just got those symptoms, so I just called the doctor and then he just advised me to have to stay at home, eh?
Welcome back. You're watching the Mint Special Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025. Achievable or a pie in the sky? This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Please also tune in to Economic Panorama on Capi Talk every Thursday at 7 p.m. Gift, I talked earlier about the key pillars of the NDS1, which include macroeconomic stability and financial re-engagement, inclusive growth, governance, infrastructure and utility, social development, all in line with our Vision 2030. Does the NDS1 have the right ingredients to address these interconnected pillars?
Definitely. If you look at the implementation matrix, for example, each line ministry, and of course there are various working groups. I'm sure you would have checked in the NDS. And the permanent secretaries in each ministry will be chairing specific working groups, working with the various stakeholders, right? Because like Sekai, what she said, the implementation is done by everyone. So from where I sit, the working groups, the 14 pillars, there are 14 working groups, and the chairpersons are coming from government as PMSEC. For me, that's quite great in terms of implementation. But of course, what is very critical as well is to then have certain minimum requirements like the economic stability, the single-digit inflation that you are talking about, which I think we are already getting there. For example, if you check inflation, has been taking a nosedive from 837% now to 471%. It is my conviction, if we reach, say, July 2021, because inflation in July 2020 was 837. If you compare July 2021, you're comparing with a higher base. So the difference will be small. So I think we will get there in terms of implementation.
The calculation is 134% for 2021 inflation average. Year on year, and of course single digits, month on month. Sekai, you know, I think we mustn't forget, of course, that the NDS1 is private sector led. I think this is the key. You know, government does not grow an economy. Private sector and SMEs and MMEs do, and I think that's very important. So, and you stated last week that it was critical for Zimbabwe to have an industrialization plan. In fact, I think your words were, it's key. So do you feel the NDS1 adequately addresses this issue?
I think the NDS adequately states the intention to do this. What is left is for industry and the relevant ministries, departments and agencies to then articulate specific industrial policy for the different subsectors of the economy and for the different value chains of the economy. And I think what is key from a private sector side, we really need to present a strong business case for the different subsectors and for the different value chains. We need to be able to model our value chains. We need to model our subsectors. What are they likely to achieve? What is the growth potential, local growth potential, regional growth potential, and continental growth potential? We need to benchmark our competitiveness in those particular subsectors and value chains against others in the region and on the continent. For me, that is key. So that is what is going to produce for us a very specific menu of an enabling environment and industrial policy, whatever incentives may be needed, because you are trading a business case with what you require to implement.
It follows what Gift is saying. They have these subcommittees, if we can call them that. It's important then that business or whatever sectors work together with government, hand in hand. Because I think we have in the past been prescribed to and said, this is our policy, this is what we're going to do, and there's no buy-in. I think now is our opportunity for all of us to sit down together in these committees and come up with an inclusive plan that we've all agreed to. Prosper, you know, the NDS1 is the 15th economic development blueprint to be launched by the Zimbabwe government since independence. So what needs to be done to ensure greater levels of implementation and success in terms of the attainment of the objectives? I think we've kind of touched on that. What are the critical success factors of the NDS1?
I think for me there are two main critical success factors. The first one, obviously, your institutions, because it's really the institutions that drive the implementation and the execution of the NDS. In particular, even the role of parastatals. I think we need to reform them so that at least we strengthen their capacity at least to implement some of the things that need to, because a lot of it will also be implemented through these parastatals. And we've seen in other countries, parastatals are contributing as much as 40%, 50% to gross domestic product. So that's number one. Number two, I think the issue of financing. There's a huge financing gap. Of course, what I didn't see was the minister didn't actually cost the financial requirements that are required in order to fully and successfully implement and execute the NDS1. But obviously, I'm sure it's a huge amount. Yeah, I was doing some estimations, and it could probably be in the average of around 100 billion.
100 billion US
for 5
dollars?
Years, for 5 years, yeah, or even more actually.
Wow.
Yeah, because of the scale of what actually needs to be done and where we are in terms of the infrastructure deficits. So I think the financing becomes very, very important. And there is need for smart partnership with critical stakeholders. And I also believe that as we begin to successfully implement institutional reforms, we are going to bring back confidence into the economy. And that will help to unlock capital inflows back, foreign direct investment. And also even the diaspora could play a critical role. And I'm also thinking that the stability that we've seen in terms of the macroeconomy should also provide a basis for us to increase our savings, our domestic savings to GDP. Because savings are a critical ingredient for financing investments. We've seen it in many countries.
I mean, it's interesting this because the minister again said that he didn't want to increase taxation. And again, it's what you've all been saying, is that if the economy grows, you increase your revenue enhancement and you get more money, which you're able to then spend. So it doesn't necessarily mean that domestic resource mobilization means increased taxes. It really means bringing more people into the formal market, into the tax net. And these are some of the issues that, because we are very informal in our economy. Gift, according to the NDS1, key to unlocking the potential of Zimbabwe's economy is resolving the security of tenure on the land in order to attract investment. In your opinion, how best should the government resolve this? Also, how important is the operationalization of the envisioned agriculture commodity exchange, which the minister also announced on my show at the beginning of the week, and he expects that agriculture commodity exchange as well as a minerals commodity exchange to be up and running by December 2020. Your comment?
Thank you. The issue of security of tenure, the only way to unlock it is to give title deeds to people. Very simple. This whole 99 years, I don't understand what is the problem with us. Because when you say 99 years, it means after 99 years, we'll then be able to take it back, whatever. Who will be there to monitor that? And why are we fighting over 99 years? And why don't we live with... I like in Rwanda. They don't care about land because no one will steal the land. It's there. You can't even take it to America. So let us give the people the title deeds and forget about it.
Okay.
Right. The issue of commodity exchange is very critical. It is a market which is going to create an efficient price discovery of commodities, particularly the cereals. So if you want to look at the commodity exchange in working right now, is the tobacco auction system. It's a very simple example of commodity exchange. That is why you see tobacco is doing very well, regardless of the challenges on the ground, because there's a network of an ecosystem of financing mechanism. With the commodity exchange, you have derivatives, you have futures, forwards, and you have warehouse receipts. So you do away with...
we have the commodities, which is even worse.
Exactly. So we need to do that. But my advice to the Minister of Finance before it is launched in December is that it must be private sector driven, not government driven. Government provides the regulation and oversight, but they should not be the owner of the commodity exchange. Because if it happens that way, then you see those issues of market failure comes in, and in fact government failure in the commodity exchange will come in.
Sakai, given Zimbabwe's recent expenditures with droughts, of course we've had many years of drought, as well as the unplanned and unforeseen COVID-19 pandemic expenses, which of course ran into billions of dollars, does the NDS1 provide a strong basis for making the economy more sustainable, resilient, diverse and innovative? I think you touched on this earlier as one of the keys.
I think, those unanticipated occurrences are best provided for by a robust and well-performing economy, because you can't avoid a drought coming if it comes. So I think the intentions in terms of economic performance that are contained in the speak to that. And then when you look at the issue of drought, there's clearly a lot of climate proofing strategy expressed in the agriculture strategy in the NDS. So that is, I think the NDS does address those things. of course, it's all really for you to be able to plan and mitigate those risks. The economy has to perform. And, you know, because of my obvious bias, I always say we need the productive sector to grow. And when we do that, we can achieve all those.
And of course, productive sector is not just big business, it's also SMEs, MMEs. And that's also critical. I mean, particularly when you look at the percentages of the SME business market, if I can call it that, in Zimbabwe. Prosper, finally, and there's so much we could unpack on the NDS1. We could have many programs about it. But finally, let me ask you this. Ultimately, the success or lack of thereof of the NDS1, commentators state, depends on whether we have strong, accountable, transparent, and inclusive institutions to drive its implementation, as well as sustainable financing model relying largely on domestic resources to finance it. And of course, Gift earlier brought in the issue of corruption, of war against corruption. Sakai obviously talked about how inclusivity of private sector in the whole NDS1. You know, your comments to all of
I think I absolutely agree with that. Obviously, we need greater transparency, we need more inclusivity, especially in terms of even the monitoring and evaluation of the NDS1. So we need also transparency and inclusivity in terms of governance of our mineral resources. We need to tackle the illicit financial flows. So we need a lot of transparency in the mineral value chains in general. I believe that will help to increase our fiscal revenues. And financing, obviously, we need to sustain our domestic resource mobilization base. So I just will be able to sustainably finance the NDS1.
I will say, though, we have a lot of work to do we not?
Our work is cut out for us.
Zimbabwe. And this is the time now that I think Sakai put it nicely. We all need to be heading in the right direction, all focused on our objective, because it hurts all of us if our economy doesn't work. That's the bottom line. I think on that note, we have come to the end of our program this afternoon. You have been watching the Mint Special Economic Panorama. Our discussion this afternoon, National Development Strategy 1, NDS1, 2021 to 2025, achievable or a pie in the sky. And I think, talking to my panelists here, let me tick achievable. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Of course, please don't forget to tune into Economic Panorama live on Capitalk every Thursday at 7 p.m. And I believe that's a Ledriz program as well. So please don't miss that. We'd like to thank our panelists, Prosper Chitambara, economist from the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz, Sakai Kuvarika, Chief Executive Officer of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, CZI, and Professor Gift Mugano, an economist. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for appearing on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A final comment. An empowered and prosperous upper middle income society by 2030. That is the goal of Zimbabwe's new National Development Strategy 1, or NDS1, which runs from 2021 to 2025. The question is, will it achieve this goal? You have heard the views of our panelists, and of course it is up to you to make up your own minds. Like all plans before it, Zimbabwe must ensure that it is implemented effectively and monitored. Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance points to the implementation matrix contained in the document and states that, and I quote, "Ministers will be held accountable for their successes and failures under the strategy." We will have to take his word on this. What is clear, and even the government agrees, is that Zimbabwe needed a bold, imaginative, transformational strategic plan so as to revive critical sectors of our economy, especially agriculture, because we need to become food sufficient. Look after our most vulnerable in society, put in place adequate social safety nets, embark on critical social public works, put youth and gender in the forefront of any plan, further ease the regulations and rules on doing business in Zimbabwe, boost our industrial growth, and of course, spend more on infrastructure. The list, unfortunately, does go on and on. To deal with all these issues may not be easy, of course. No one is saying that it is. But it is also, my opinion, not a fairy tale either. It can be done. With a strong will, all stakers buying into the strategy, and Zimbabwe sticking to the course laid out. Why not? The question I ask you is, what other option do we have? I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye. Have a fantastic weekend, and you all be safe.